Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Charles Leclerc takes pole position for the Las Vegas Grand Prix, but the only other team to get both their cars into Q3 was Williams in addition to Ferrari. But Max Verstappen versus Esteban Ocon, again, another dramatic moment on track that we've seen plenty of over the last couple of years. Verstappen, after Ocon overtakes him going into their flying lap attempts, deliberately ruins both of their laps and takes Ocon effectively out of Q1 at the end of the day. These guys do not get on, it seems, on track or even off track at the moment, and yet another instance between the pair of them. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Firstly though, massive drama from the fan base side of things when people were kicked out late last night trying to watch practice. Now, there was lots of expectation that Formula 1 would, refund these tickets because, let's be honest, they watched 8 minutes of practice 1 before it was then cancelled. They waited 5 hours while all the concrete was getting poured into the, the drain covers effectively that were causing issues. They probably knew, Formula 1, that by the time that all was resolved and FP2 can actually get up and running, that there was no way the fans could be there so long because they've got to prepare it for the next day type thing. So their fans got kicked out after waiting hours to try and watch any on-track running, and it was a shambles. At least if they'd have told the fans, look, we're sorry guys, you're not going to be able to watch this session. It's going to start too late. Here's the refunds, and we apologise. That would have at least been somewhat acceptable. But for whatever reason, Formula 1 CEO and, the Las Vegas Grand Prix guy as well came out with a statement yesterday that read as follows. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is quite a long statement, 600 odd words, none of which, as Chris Midland rightly points out, are sorry, we apologise, our mistake, and, here's a potential repercussion. It basically reads, as Chris Medland rightly says, like an excuse. Now, I'm not saying that their reasons aren't valid, but at the end of the day, some people have paid some money, some people have paid a lot of money to come and watch this Grand Prix this weekend. Most people have paid a lot of money, especially, let's say you're a VIP guest, you paid big money to go and, be in one of these, expensive booths or whatever to watch the practice session, and then you get kicked out just before it starts. You're not going to be so happy about it. So they come up with a mega statement here, and then they did finally say, all right, guys, we'll give you $200 to go and spend at our store. So, and I what's that going to get you? A hat? Maybe a t-shirt or something? So they're literally going to go to the Grand Prix and get themselves a hat for their troubles. So, as this guy said in the replies, get evicted off my seat, for which I paid a couple of grand, and I get the shirt back for the inconvenience. So, yeah, an absolute mess, to be honest. It's pretty embarrassing, really, for Formula 1 that they could have had a much better PR outcome here. They're making so much money off this damn sport at the moment, and they come through and basically just spit in the face of their fans, especially the guys that were there for just one day and wanted to just be there for practice. Maybe there's a better solution for those that have had a 3-day pass, but still, an absolute shambles. But thankfully today, the on-track running actually went relatively smoothly. Lance Stroll did get a 5-place penalty though for overtaking under yellow flags in FP3. Pretty sure he was looking at his, which is pretty severe to be honest for, this type of incident in FP3. You don't usually see penalties this harsh, but apparently he had his head down looking at his dash and was concentrating on the Ferrari ahead of him, missed the flag, and then got this instance. He could have also got the same sort of thing in qualifying, but he actually ended up getting away with that one. Now, FP3 itself was confusing, to say the very least. There wasn't much representative running here, shall we say, but it was the Mercedes of George Russell, the McLaren of Oscar Piastri, and the Williams of Logan Sargent, so all Mercedes-powered cars, up here P1, P2, 3, 3. And look, Williams knew they were going to be good here. It's a circuit that suits them relatively well. Cold temperatures, which is pretty good for their tyres that do not like it when the temperatures are particularly warm. And a several mega long straights where the Williams is going to be competitive. So they knew this was going to be a good weekend for them, but quite how good, I'm not sure even they quite expected. Now, Charles Leclerc today was mega, and it was so impressive watching this guy put in lap after lap. Some of the laps he did, especially in Q2, were near enough mesmerising, and it was quite clear that from the very early days, Ferrari had the qualifying pace advantage here. Now, race pace advantage, that is a very different story, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes' time. But in qualifying, we know how this works. The Red Bull, we talked about it the other day. Cold conditions, it doesn't work its tyres as well as the other cars. in qualifying. It works its tyres well in the race in terms of keeping them alive. What that means for tomorrow's race, that's another question entirely, but I think it's no real surprise here that the Ferraris were going to be faster than Max on the Saturday, or on the Friday, I guess, is when qualifying technically has happened in Las Vegas time. But the big surprise of Q1, no doubt, is both McLarens out in Q1, which I'm sure was not what they were expecting to be this bad. Sure, their car is better in the medium speed, the higher speed corners. Circuits like this with predominantly low speed and then straights, it's not so suited for McLaren, but clearly they got some things wrong, because Piastri P19, Norris P16, disastrous for them. Now, sure, Aston Martin probably won't have enough anyway to regain that position in the championship, but Norris was potentially on to still get P2 in the drivers, or at least P3 in the drivers. He could have potentially got Hamilton in the drivers. That's probably not going to be happening any longer after today's results. So yeah, this is the thing. The last couple of days, especially after the results after Lando's comeback in Mexico and after the result in Brazil, there was lots of talk that, well, could McLaren be the challenger next year to Red Bull, which I still think is valid discussion. But then you see races like this and you think, well, there's still a long way to go to get the consistency that Red Bull and Verstappen are delivering. Norris was also convinced that he was impeded by Perez in qualifying in that Q1 session and believed that he will get a penalty. That doesn't seem to have happened yet, and Norris was seemingly implying that, well, if he doesn't, then that is questionable stewarding, maybe once again on the Red Bull side. And, well, potentially more questionable stewarding, what we're going to see here from Max Verstappen. So let's just dive into this scenario. This is coming down to the start of the final straight. This is the end of the Las Vegas Strip, the boulevard, and they're turning into what is effectively going to be the final run down into turn 17, which leads into turn 1. So your lap basically starts here. If you want to have a good lap, you've got to get on the throttle right out of this little chicane, run that all the way down into turn 17. That takes you into turn 1, maximum throttle, maximum speed, and then you're going to start the lap on the right foot. So all the drivers here, we can see both Alpines, both AlphaTauris, both Red Bulls, and I guess that Zhou in that weird liveried Alfa Romeo trying to get ready to go for their lap. And it's an absolute mess here because, you're not starting your lap just the corner before, you're starting your lap 4 or so corners before, trying to get a good run. We then saw, going down into turn 1, that Max had just sent it in to Esteban Ocon. Like, this looks like they're racing, and they kind of were racing, but they were both on qualifying laps. So it was kind of unclear what exactly happened on this one, especially when you then get the radio messages. What a stupid idiot, says Verstappen. Now, we know that these guys have history, right? Verstappen and Ocon have plenty of history, definitely going back to Brazil 2018, and we'll discuss that more in a second. Verstappen not happy with Ocon, and Ocon, he's not everyone's best friend, is he? Let's be honest. Not from the fan base side, but also from the driver's side. For some reason, I guess Ocon thought that Verstappen was his teammate, because the way that he interacts with his teammates, Ocon, tends to be usually quite similar to this. Even last weekend in Brazil, there were 2 instances where he crashes into Alonso, then blames Alonso, and then at the start of the Grand Prix, maybe it was the start of the sprint, I cannot forget, but I think it was the start of the Grand Prix, when he, instead of attacking and looking forwards, he was basically just trying to defend from Gasly, and Gasly was like, why is Ocon, treating me like this? But that's what Ocon does, and that's why he's, he doesn't always make the best of friends, despite having on his day some pretty reasonable pace. Verstappen says, what a stupid idiot, and then Ocon goes back and then blames Verstappen. That's a joke, honestly. Verstappen diving into turn 1 like crazy. Now, I think that Ocon was kind of asking for this. Should Verstappen be allowed to do what he did? I don't think so, but within the rules, it's apparently perfectly fine. So this is the onboards, just to break down what happens. We're running down into turn 17, and that's into turn 1, basically. Ocon gets a slipstream behind Max. They're both starting flying lap attempts here. Now, Ocon probably could have just backed off, let Max take a couple of second advantage, and then run through. But Ocon decided, all right, I've got the slipstream here on Max going down into the first corner, basically. So let me take the lead and let me start my lap first, which he did. So here we are, crossing the line, and Ocon is leading Verstappen out. Verstappen at this point, though, is kind of screwed, right? Because his lap is basically ruined because he can't just follow Ocon the whole way, especially because Ocon's in a slower car. So Max basically either has to abort his lap, which he doesn't want to do, or do what he eventually does. So now he's in the slipstream going down to turn 1, and then he decides, here we see Ocon on the racing line, which is the fastest way around this corner. Max decides, you know what, Ocon, I've had enough of your BS, and I'm just going to take you out of this qualifying lap. He sends one down the inside of Ocon, and almost goes off the track here, actually, Max. He basically touch the white line. So, he was not attempting to make this corner. He was not attempting to actually do a proper qualifying lap. He was solely attempting to ruin Ocon's lap, which, maybe fair enough, and I can totally understand why Max felt this way and why Max decided to do this. But at the end of the day, this is impeding, right? And you might think, well, why is Verstappen not getting penalised? The reason is, apparently, is because if you do this while you're both on flying laps, they're both on hot laps here, so it's apparently fine. You can't impede if you're also on a hot lap. You're kind of like racing, which is confusing, I can't lie, in terms of the rulings. Like, let's say I'm going slow and I'm on a cool down lap or an out lap or something, and my engineer doesn't tell me about a car behind me. I impede him very marginally. That's a slam dunk 3-second or 3-place penalty, right, for the Grand Prix. And that might be very accidental, but that's the penalty, that's the rules, and I think that's fair enough. But then you get issues where drivers will, in Verstappen's case, deliberately impede Ocon's lap. And I think that his decision here was probably justified. But he did deliberately impede Ocon's lap, ruin his lap, and ruin his own lap. And yet that's apparently perfectly fine. So I do wonder whether there's a thing where the stewards might have to think, do we have to reconsider the rules on this? In the same way to when Verstappen was doing the thing, playing the games of chicken under the safety car when he was going right alongside the car in front, they eventually said, all right, Max, you can't do that anymore. There might be a rule that needs to be changed because Max also did this back in Austria, you guys might remember, when he felt that Hamilton was coming out of the final corner, Verstappen was just finishing a flying lap on that occasion. He felt that Hamilton probably didn't impede him, but he got a bit of dirty air from Hamilton. So Verstappen wasn't happy. Hamilton was then starting his flying lap, and Verstappen got a slipstream, finishing his flying lap, dived on the inside of turn 1, and deliberately ruined Hamilton's lap, as considered to be like a bit of a revenge foul. That wasn't even, punished or investigated at the time, and I guess Verstappen could claim, oh, well, I was going for another flying lap, so, this is perfectly fine. So maybe Verstappen would just do this to everybody that annoyed him and not just Ocon in particular, and I do think that the way Ocon treated this was, Ocon was kind of asking for it, overtaking Max going into the first corner, and Ocon obviously knows that he's ruining Verstappen's lap, because when Ocon makes this overtake, he knows that Verstappen's right behind him in a faster car, so he knows full well that Verstappen's lap is going to be compromised, or Verstappen's going to have to abort the lap. But, so Ocon, I think, was asking for trouble here, and we know with the way Max operates, he was not going to let that slide, and deliberately ruined both of their laps, which eventually meant that Verstappen was through, and Ocon was out. And I do wonder how much of this comes back to this moment, of course, Brazil 2018, when Ocon was attempting to unlap himself over Verstappen, and we can understand with instances like this exactly why Ocon is not necessarily the best of friends with, certain drivers on the grid, and doesn't always make, the best of friends with the fan base, I suppose, as well. And then we know all the drama afterwards when they had the confrontation, and Verstappen obviously wasn't happy about it, and here's the two of them in some legendary images as they were at the time. So yeah, what's your guys' perspective on this? Because I think that it's kind of fault on both sides. I totally understand Verstappen's attempted retaliation, but I'm not sure it should be perfectly legal to do what Verstappen did and get away with it, because, you could just ruin somebody's lap and say, well, I was on a hot lap, so, it's apparently fine. And look, Verstappen will live within the rules. That's how it works. And I wonder whether changes to that might potentially be made. But after all this drama happens, we've got to get on to Q2. Q2 was fascinating in the way that Leclerc put in a monster lap here. 5/10 up on Sainz, 5/10 up on Russell. It was then Gasly, Verstappen, 8/10 back. Both Williams make it through. Hamilton was out in P11. He had a decent lap on his first run, but then couldn't improve at all in his second run, which is just all tyre temperature, especially for these cars in these type of conditions. You get the tyres in the window, you're going to improve. You don't get the tyres in the window, they are, 4-5 degrees cooler than you wanted, either, poor outlap preparation or whatever, you're not going to be able to improve. Now, Perez, it's funny really, Hamilton's out in Q2 here, but Perez, again, his 9th failure this season to get into Q3, and that comes because I'm not really sure what Red Bull are doing. They said they only were bringing 3 sets of tyres into qualifying. So I guess they're going to save quite a few for the race if they need to do like a mega multi-stop Grand Prix. I guess we'll see how that goes. But yeah, Perez did his lap earlier when the track conditions were worse and the track hadn't rubbered in as much yet. So I think a bit of an error there on Red Bull's part, really, sending Perez out that early and also not bringing him another set of tyres that he could realistically do another run to probably get through. They hoped his lap was good enough. It wasn't. The other guys around them improved significantly enough. So probably partly on Perez, but frankly, partly on Red Bull as well. I think we're messing that one up a little bit for Perez, to be honest. And yeah, he said, look, we had a wrong strategy on that one. It was pre-planned and it didn't go to plan. Hamilton also said that, just getting the tyres working didn't work. He said that after qualifying or after FP3, he made some changes to the car that he's hopeful will make them work in the race, but he's not so keen about the way that it worked for quali. So, there's a few times this season when Hamilton said, oh yeah, well after practice I made a couple of changes and George's changes were good, my changes were bad. Not really sure what that is, and that hasn't always been the case. I mean, on average, Hamilton I think has still had the better of George in qualifying just about, but it's very marginal between the pair of them, despite the fact that there is significantly this season quite some race pace differential. Now, Leclerc was, I think, always going to get pole position here, as long as he didn't put it in the wall. His laps weren't even clean. He was on the radio saying how terrible his laps were. He was like, oh my god, that was awful. I think his sector 1 wasn't particularly pretty, but he had enough for provisional pole. He then improved further, as did Sainz. Verstappen couldn't improve at all on his second run, but his first run was still good enough for P3, which is actually good enough, of course, for P2 because of Sainz's 10-place penalty. But the big story, really, of this Q3 was both Williams cars through, which was impressive in and of itself because Logan Sargeant has been P20 in qualifying for the last 5 Grand Prix in a row. And this time, he shows up with a bang and sticks it P7, eventually P6, because with the penalty for Sainz, the 10-place pen for changing their engine or changing their battery store, their energy store, their battery, which in and of itself highly controversial. The Williams should be good here in these conditions, but P5, P6 is their best quali result for Williams since Russia 2016. Awesome execution from the team, awesome execution for the drivers. Gotta feel bad the fact that Sargeant at some point was P4, but then again, Albon sticks his nose in front to make it, I think, 21-0 this season between Albon and Sargeant in qualifying, but still awesome to see. This is the grid, and it's a mega grid, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, it's a Leclerc pole, Verstappen P2. We've seen this story before, you know what I mean? We know how this ends. Sorry, Leclerc fans. Sorry, Ferrari fans. But we know how this ends. Russell P3. Now, look, as I've said before, cold tyres, first lap. The Red Bull might have some trouble with some tyre warm-up and stuff like this. Could Russell send it into the side of Verstappen and, and bowl him out of the race? Possible, but I wouldn't necessarily bet on it. Gasly with an awesome lap to go P4, despite the fact that Ocon's in P16. Then both Williams that are going to be difficult to overtake. Awesome stuff from Bottas as well. To put that out for Romeo, P7. What an awesome quali from him. Again, also the Haas was looking good. Maybe not a massive surprise. The cars that kind of cook their tyres are going to be quite good throwing them up for a quali lap. But yeah, Bottas P7, Magnussen P8, and then, of course, with Sainz getting demoted to P12, which honestly, if they were P1, P2, the Ferraris, I think there's a chance they hold Max back. They can work DRS and it's tough to overtake maybe with the slipstream and the DRS, stuff like this, and that Ferrari's quick in a straight line. But with Verstappen with only one car to get through, it's probably going to be a foregone conclusion again. Sainz is going to be fuming. He is fuming being starting back there. Gotta say, though, as well, P9, P10, P11, P12, Alonso, Hamilton, Perez, Sainz, that's a banger kind of battle for the start of the points, because Hamilton will be wanting to attack, as will Perez, but will potentially also be having to defend from, Sainz and Perez behind, and of course, Alonso is not going to let Hamilton past easily, so that's going to be really exciting. The McLarens, not exactly, well, are they out of position, or are they just slow on this track? That's a debate that we will, I guess, have our answer for tomorrow, and that's why I like no sprint races, because you won't know the answer until the actual proper race on Sunday. Understandably, Sainz is deeply frustrated about this. I don't feel like talking. I'm in a bad mood, kind of, going on to say that having got that grid penalty that wasn't his fault, he expected more from the sport. So, I totally get it from Sainz, and it is frustrating for all involved, but for whatever reason, those are the rules, and those are the way in which they have been applied. Just quickly from Toto Wolff, he talked about their car not looking so good on the graining front, and this is a big talking point for tomorrow's race, especially from George Russell, but also from others, that the graining on the tyres are not designed to work in these type of cold temperatures, and they don't work particularly well. And that means that if you push the tyres a bit too far, they start to grain in, and you can't really, in these temperatures, kind of typically when the tyre starts to grain out the rubber, they'll just kind of drive through the graining phase, and the car and the tyres will then come back into a right window. That doesn't seem to happen in these temperatures. Once the tyres grain, they're basically dead, like forever. And, well, who's going to get affected most by that? Mercedes were saying theirs weren't looking good, but everyone has been graining. And I think that it's probably going to affect the Ferraris, let's be honest, because they do work their tyres quite hard. And even in race simulations they did on Friday, Verstappen was half a second clear with the Ferrari. So I think this race again might be a foregone conclusion tomorrow, unfortunately. But who knows? Maybe the Red Bulls are going to suffer from that graining phase as well. You just can't rule it out. It's tricky to set things up for. Just a quick final thing, it appears that the activation point for the DRS zone has actually now been brought back further. So there's an additional 50 meters of DRS on that long straight. I don't know whether they're thinking, all right, let's give Max the easy win. Probably not going to matter anyway, to be honest. But yeah, even more DRS they're giving on the straight. Not sure it's necessary, but the drivers did say, well, you know, with the toe not being as much, with the low, kind of basically low downforce means less DRS power. So maybe that's one of the reasons. But yeah, still, even more DRS. I'm guessing they're trying to make sure we get as much overtaken as you possibly can. But Max is still not convinced this track is actually any good. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below on all this drama. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.